A drifter noticed the beds felt warm and pulsed when he pressed down. In 1883, a remote hotel in the Arizona Territory hid a chilling secret. The hotelier wasn't just offering shelter, he was turning his guests into a living nightmare. Travelers who checked in were never the same, their bodies trapped inside the very mattresses they slept on. But when a drifter arrived, something caught his eye. The beds felt warm, and worse, they pulsed like something was alive within them. The drifter had no idea that his discovery would set him on a terrifying path. He wasn't just checking into a hotel, he was about to become a part of its twisted history. The Arizona desert stretched out like a sea of endless dust. The sun hung in the sky, an oppressive ball of fire, beating down on everything in sight. The drifter's boots kicked up sand as he trudged along the barren road, his shoulders weighed down by exhaustion. He had been walking for days, and the dry, hot winds seemed to suck the life out of him with each step. His canteen had long since run dry, and the thought of water burned in his throat. Then, like an oasis rising from the wasteland, he saw Ita's small, isolated hotel in the distance. At first, it seemed too good to be true, a mirage conjured by his dehydration, but as he got closer, the shape of the building became clearer. A two-story structure with faded wooden boards and a porch that sagged under the weight of years. The place was quiet, almost too quiet. No chatter, no sounds of horses or wagons, nothing to indicate that this was a place of refuge for travelers. The drifter felt a strange sense of relief wash over him as he approached the front door. His eyes scanned the empty yard, not a soul in sight. The silence pressed down on him like a weight, and for a moment he hesitated, unsure whether it was the exhaustion or something else that made him wary, but his feet moved before his mind could protest. He climbed the creaky steps and knocked once. The sound echoed strangely, like a hollow warning. The door swung open with an eerie creak. A tall man stood in the doorway, his features sharp, his eyes almost too calm. His clothes were immaculate, his posture perfect, as though he had been waiting for someone like the drifter. There was something unsettling about his smile, a coldness hidden behind the pleasantries. "Welcome to the Riverside Hotel," the hotelier said smoothly, stepping aside to let the drifter enter. "I've been expecting you." The drifter blinked, taken aback. "You've been expecting me?" The hotelier's smile didn't waver. "Of course. There aren't many travelers passing through this place. You must be thirsty." The drifter nodded, his throat parched. As he stepped inside, the heavy scent of wood and something faintly sweet filled his nostrils. The air was thick with the kind of stillness that made his skin crawl, like the silence was holding its breath, waiting for something to break it. The hotel's interior was dim, with only the soft light of lanterns hanging from the rafters. The walls, painted in shades of brown and yellow, seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. There were no paintings, no decoration, just bare wood. The floorboards groaned underfoot as he followed the hotelier down the hallway. "Can I offer you a room?" the hotelier asked. The drifter nodded, and they continued down the narrow corridor. The silence between them was thick, and with every step, the drifter felt as though something was watching him. He couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel wasn't just a place of rest. It felt wrong. It wasn't just the stillness that unnerved him, it was the way the hotel seemed to pulse, like it was alive, breathing. The hotelier led him to a room at the end of the hall. The door creaked open, revealing a modest but clean space. The bed, made with crisp white linens, sat in the center of the room. The drifter's eyes immediately went to it. The warmth radiating from the mattress was unmistakable. He frowned, wondering if the heat of the desert sun had seeped through the walls. "You must be tired," the hotelier said. "Rest. I'll bring you something to drink." The drifter hesitated, then nodded. As the hotelier left, he stepped toward the bed, his boots making soft sounds against the wooden floor. His body ached for rest, but something about the bed made him pause. The warmth beneath the sheets felt like nothing he had ever felt before. It wasn't just heat, it was almost alive. He reached out, pressing his hand against the mattress. The heat seemed to pulse back, as though something underneath was moving. His breath caught in his throat, but before he could pull away, the door to the room creaked open. The hotelier stood in the doorway, holding a glass of water. "Here," he said, handing it to the drifter. His eyes lingered for a moment too long, the smile still firmly in place. "I trust you'll be comfortable." The drifter took the glass, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but what could he do? He had no other choice but to accept the hospitality. "Thank you," the drifter muttered, but the hotelier's eyes stayed locked on him, an unsettling intensity behind them. The drifter quickly drank, the cool liquid doing little to ease the sense of foreboding that had settled deep in his chest. The hotelier gave a slight bow and left, the door closing with a soft thud. Alone now, the drifter turned his attention back to the bed. He pressed his hand to it again. The warmth, the pulsing, it was unmistakable. A chill ran down his spine. What was it? Was it just the desert heat, or was there something more to this strange feeling? The silence in the hotel pressed down on him, and the more he thought about it, the less he wanted to know. But his body was too tired. His eyelids grew heavy, and the pulsing beneath the bed seemed to lull him into a false sense of comfort. With one last glance at the door, he lay down, closing his eyes. The warmth beneath him was oddly soothing, and soon he drifted into a restless sleep. As the drifter lay there, his breathing steady, the hotel seemed to watch him. The pulsing under the mattress never stopped, each beat slower than the last, but still unmistakable. The hotel had welcomed him in. But what he didn't know was that he wasn't just a guest. Here he was already a part of the hotel's dark, twisted story. And tomorrow, he would start to unravel the truth, whether he was ready or not. But the drifter's nightmare was only beginning. What he didn't know was that the hotel wasn't just waiting for him to sleep, it was already feeding on him. The morning sun was already high, casting a golden light that filtered through the narrow windows of the hotel. The drifter woke slowly, his mind foggy, still haunted by the unsettling warmth of the bed. As he stretched, the reality of the night before hit him all over again, the pulsing, the strange sensation of life beneath him. But when he tried to recall the feeling, it seemed almost too surreal. Maybe it was the heat, maybe it was his exhaustion. He couldn't be sure. But one thing was undeniable, something was wrong with the hotel. The silence of the building was unnerving, the kind of silence that creeps under your skin, a heavy, suffocating presence. No sounds of life, no murmurs or footsteps. It felt like the entire hotel was holding its breath. He rose from the bed, eyes scanning the room. The air was thick, still, no breeze from the windows, no creak of wood from the floorboards. The only sound was the distant ticking of a clock somewhere, as if the hotel itself was counting the seconds, waiting for something. The drifter hesitated before walking toward the door. The unease had settled in deeper since the night before, but he didn't know what else to do. His throat still felt dry from the lack of water, but there was no one around to help. The hotel was empty, or at least it seemed to be. As he stepped into the hallway, he was struck by how eerily quiet it was. The wooden boards underfoot didn't creak like they should have. Even the air felt wrong, heavy and stagnant, as if it had been locked inside the hotel for years. His boots made no sound, as though the hotel itself had absorbed all the noise. He passed the rooms, each one shut tight, their doors standing in quiet, uninviting rows. No lights under the doorways, no movement. The hotel felt dead. His heart began to race. Was it a trick of the mind? Or was the hotel alive in some way, feeding on the silence? His footsteps echoed in the hall, but no one responded. As he walked, his eyes flicked to the paintings on the walls, faded portraits of strangers with hollow eyes that seemed to watch him as he passed. The faces were blurry, out of focus, like memories fading too quickly to grasp. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, something beyond the hotelier, something darker. He pushed open the door to the dining room, hoping to find something, someone. But the room was empty, the long tables set with plates and glasses, as though they had been waiting for guests who would never come. The only noise was the faint hum of the ceiling fan, spinning lazily above him. He glanced around, half expecting someone to appear, but the room stayed still. Suddenly, a figure moved across the room so quick it almost seemed to be a trick of the light. The drifter turned, his heart skipping a beat. A man, tall and gaunt, stood by the far window, his back to the drifter. His face was hidden in the shadow of the light, but his body was thin, too thin. The drifter couldn't make out his features, but there was something about the way he stood frozen in place that sent a chill down the drifter's spine. "Hello?" the drifter called out, his voice hoarse in the quiet. The man didn't respond. Instead, he slowly turned, his movements jerky like he was being pulled by strings. The drifter froze. The man's eyes were wide, unblinking, his expression empty, vacant, like a shell of a person, one who had forgotten how to speak, how to feel. He stared at the drifter with an unblinking gaze that made the drifter's stomach twist. Then, without a word, the man turned and shuffled out of the room. The drifter didn't know whether to follow or turn back, but his instincts told him something was wrong, something deeply wrong. He stood there, unsure what to do. The silence was almost unbearable, pressing against his chest like an invisible weight. The man's sudden appearance and his vacant stare sent a shiver through the drifter. But there was one thing that disturbed him more than anything else, the look in the man's eyes. They weren't filled with fear, they were empty, like a person who had seen the worst of the world and had given up. The drifter followed cautiously, But when he reached the hallway, the man had vanished. There was no trace of him, no footsteps, no sign that anyone had ever been there. The drifter's breath quickened, his mind racing to make sense of what he had just witnessed. He turned back to his room, his head spinning. The place was so quiet it felt suffocating. And then, as he passed the first guest room, something caught his eye. A door cracked open just a sliver, barely noticeable. His heartbeat quickened. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as his instinct screamed at him to ignore it, to turn away. But curiosity gripped him. He pushed the door open slowly. The room was dark, the shutters drawn, but there was a shape lying in the bed, a figure covered with a blanket. He couldn't make out the details, but the shape seemed too still, too unnatural. The drifter took another step closer, his gut telling him something wasn't right. He reached for the blanket and pulled it back. His stomach lurched. The body beneath it was cold, motionless. A woman, her skin pale and stretched tight against her bones, her eyes wide open and unblinking. Her face was twisted in a grimace, frozen in fear, as if she had died in the middle of a scream. The drifter stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest. The room spun around him as the implications of what he was seeing settled in. She hadn't just died, she had been kept alive, preserved. Her body was withered, as though it had been drained of life for weeks. And then, like a dark cloud lifting, the truth hit him. The pulsing from the mattress, the strange warmth. It wasn't the heat of the desert. It was something else, something alive. The woman, trapped in that bed, was only the first of many. His head swam as panic crept in. How many others had he passed, their bodies hidden in plain sight, their lives preserved by the hotel? And why hadn't the hotelier told him? Why was no one warning him? Just as he turned to leave, the hotelier appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of cold indifference. "Is there a problem?" he asked smoothly, his voice too calm for the situation. The drifter didn't answer. His mind was too scrambled, too desperate to understand. The hotelier's eyes narrowed, as if he could read the drifter's thoughts. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You shouldn't have seen that," the hotelier said, his voice eerily calm. "But you will understand soon enough. You see, this is how things are here. You're already a part of the hotel now." The drifter's heart pounded as he stumbled back, the walls of the hotel closing in around him. He had entered a nightmare place where nothing made sense, and the more he tried to unravel it, the deeper the darkness pulled him. What the drifter didn't realize was that his discovery wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. The hotel's hold on him was about to tighten in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The drifter couldn't shake the image of the woman's lifeless body, her twisted face frozen in fear. The hotel had become a suffocating prison, and every passing minute felt like he was sinking deeper into its grasp. Ed tried to leave, tried to step out into the sunlight, into freedom, but something kept pulling him back. The silence, the strange warmth beneath his feet, the feeling of being watched. But the worst part wasn't the eerie stillness of the hotel, nor the way the guests moved in silence. It was the feeling that he was being drawn into something far darker than he could comprehend. The hallways were quieter than ever, as if the hotel was holding its breath, waiting. The drifter couldn't take it anymore. His eyes darted around, his body tense with anxiety, the weight of the silence pressing down on him like a suffocating blanket. He needed to get out. He needed to understand what was happening here. The drifter headed down the hallway, feeling the familiar chill of dread crawl up his spine. He passed the same closed doors, the same vacant windows, and yet the feeling of being followed never stopped. It was there, in the corner of his vision, like a shadow lurking just behind him. At the end of the hall, a flickering light caught his attention. He paused, squinting through the dimness. A door cracked open, with a faint light seeping out from inside. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The drifter's curiosity overpowered his fear, and he moved towards it, slowly, silently. As he approached, a strange sensation flooded him, like the very air around him was thickening, tightening like a noose. He reached for the handle, hesitated, and then turned it. Inside, the room was dark. At first, he couldn't see anything, just shadows dancing in the dim light. But as his eyes adjusted, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A man, standing in the center of the room. He was tall, dressed in tattered clothes, and his face was too pale, like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. His eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on the drifter with an intensity that felt unnatural. "Help me," the man whispered hoarsely, his voice barely a breath, a ragged rasp. The drifter froze. The man's lips barely moved, but the words were clear. His face, however, was unreadable, like a mask, cold and emotionless. "Please," the man repeated, his voice trembling. "You don't understand." They're watching. You're already," he stopped, his voice catching in his throat, as if he couldn't speak the next words. He reached out a trembling hand, but the drifter couldn't move. He was frozen, locked in place by something deeper than fear. Before he could respond, a voice echoed down the hallway. It was calm, eerily smooth, the voice of the hotelier. "What are you doing here?" His voice sliced through the air like a knife, its cold edge sending a shiver through the drifter's spine. The drifter turned, his heart pounding in his chest. The hotelier stood in the doorway, his figure shadowed by the dim light from the hallway, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were unmistakable. The man didn't seem shocked, didn't even blink as he stepped into the room, his gaze flicking toward the man standing motionless in the corner. "I told you," the hotelier said, his tone still unnervingly calm. "We don't talk about these things. Not here, not in this hotel." The man in the corner made a small, pained sound, and the hotelier turned his cold gaze toward him, his lips curling into a slow, predatory smile. The drifter could almost see the man's soul being drained by the look in the hotelier's eyes, like he was prey, a victim already consumed. The drifter stepped back instinctively. His mind raced, his thoughts too scrambled to form coherent words. What was happening? Who was this man? And why was the hotelier treating him like this? The question spiraled in his mind, but one thing was clear: the hotel was not just a place, it was a trap designed to feed on its guests, to hold them in a death-like grip until their souls were drained. The hotelier turned to the drifter, his smile never faltering. "You were already here. You've already been marked," he said quietly. The words sank into the drifter's chest like a weight. "I'm sorry you had to learn this way, but it's inevitable." "Marked?" the drifter repeated, his voice barely a whisper. The hotelier nodded. "There's no leaving, not unless you want to become part of the hotel's story. You're already trapped in the web. You'll never be free." The drifter felt the blood drain from his face as the words hit him. This wasn't just a hotel, it was something much worse. It was a place of feeding, a place where guests were slowly consumed, their life force drained to feed something far darker than any of them could comprehend. The woman in the bed, the man standing in the corner, they were all part of it, part of the ritual. But before he could react, the man in the corner lurched forward, his body jerking like a puppet on strings. He reached for the drifter with both hands, but the hotelier stepped in between them, his hand raised in a slow, deliberate gesture. "Don't," the hotelier said, his voice like ice. "He's already gone. He's just a shell, a vessel. There's nothing left of him." The drifter's chest tightened as the truth hit him like a punch to the stomach. The guests weren't just trapped here, they were being used, kept alive in some twisted way to fuel whatever malevolent force controlled this hotel. The warmth of the mattress, the strange pulsing, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't just heat. It was the life force of the guests, being drained to feed the hotel's dark power. The drifter staggered back, almost tripping over his own feet. He didn't know what to say, what to do. His mind was reeling, his vision blurry. This couldn't be real, but the cold, unwavering look in the hotelier's eyes told him everything he needed to know. "You'll understand," the hotelier said softly, his voice like honey laced with poison. "Sooner or later, everyone does. It's how the hotel survives." The drifter turned and bolted from the room, his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't know where he was running or if he could escape. He had no plan, only the desperate need to get out, to break free from this nightmare. But as he ran, the walls seemed to close in on him, the doors shifting just out of reach. Every turn led him deeper into the hotel, deeper into its suffocating darkness. What the drifter didn't know was that escape was no longer an option. He wasn't just trapped in the hotel, he was becoming part of it. The drifter's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps as he ran down the hallway, his boots slapping against the wooden floor. His mind raced, but his feet moved on their own, driven by a primal fear he couldn't quite explain. The hotel had become a living nightmare, a place where the walls whispered, the shadows moved, and the very air felt thick with danger. The hotelier's cold words echoed in his mind, and the more he thought about them, the more they gnawed at his sanity. "You were already marked." It was a chilling realization. He hadn't just stumbled into a haunted building or a place of ill repute. No, the hotel had taken him in, and now it claimed him body and soul. He wasn't just trapped here. He was part of the hotel's twisted ritual, its growing hunger. Every turn he took seemed to lead him deeper into the heart of the hotel, where the air felt colder, the silence heavier. No matter how fast he ran, no matter how hard he tried to escape, the doors seemed to close behind him, as though the building was alive, its walls shifting and trapping him in a maze of darkness. It was as if the hotel had eyes, watching his every move, anticipating his every thought. The more he struggled to break free, the more suffocating the place became. He rounded a corner and froze. The hallway ahead was completely different. It wasn't the familiar stretch of closed doors he'd seen before. This hallway was narrow, dimly lit, and the floor was covered in thick red carpet that seemed to swallow the sound of his footsteps. At the end of the hall stood a door unmarked, uninviting, but oddly familiar. The drifter's heart skipped a beat as he stepped toward it. There was something about the door that called to him, a magnetic pull he couldn't resist. Without thinking, he reached out and turned the handle. The door opened with a soft creak, revealing a room unlike any he had seen in the hotel. It was small, cramped, and there was a distinct smell of sickly sweet, decaying odor that made his stomach churn. The walls were lined with old, faded photographs, pictures of people he didn't recognize, but all of them had the same vacant eyes, the same empty expression. It was as though their souls had been drained, leaving only the shells of their former selves. The drifter's hand trembled as he moved closer to one of the pictures, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, but then his eyes caught something on the floor. It was a piece of paper, crumpled and stained with something dark. He bent down to pick it up, and as he read the faded ink, a cold shiver ran down his spine. "You are not meant to leave. You are part of us now." The words seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the drifter felt his chest tighten. This was no longer just a hotel, it was something far darker. It wasn't a place for rest, it was a trap, a breeding ground for something ancient and malevolent. Suddenly, he heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from behind him. He spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. The door had closed on its own, and the room had become even darker. The faint light from the hallway barely reached in, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The hotelier stood in the doorway, his face as cold and expressionless as ever. "I see you've found the truth," he said, his voice calm, like they were having a casual conversation. "I thought you might." The drifter's mind raced. "What is this place?" he demanded, his voice cracking with desperation. "What have you done to these people?" The hotelier didn't answer right away. He simply stepped into the room, his gaze moving to the photograph the drifter had been staring at. "They are ours, just as you are now," he said, his voice taking on an eerie reverence. "The hotel takes what it needs, and it keeps them alive. Forever." The drifter's breath hitched. The realization hit him harder than any blow had ever taken. The people in the photograph say were alive. Not in the sense that they were living, breathing humans, but in a way that was even worse. They were trapped, preserved by the hotel's dark power, their life force siphoned off to sustain the building itself. "Why?" the drifter gasped, his voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" The hotelier's smile widened, but it wasn't kind. It wasn't even human. "Because it must be done," he said. "The hotel has a hunger that must be fed. It's not just a place, it's a living entity. And every guest who checks in becomes part of its story whether they want to or not." The drifter staggered back, his mind reeling. It didn't make sense. How could something like this exist? How could a hotel building be alive, feeding on the people who pass through its doors? "You're wrong," the drifter spat. "I'm not part of this." The hotelier's eyes narrowed, his smile faltering for the first time. "You think you can leave?" His voice was suddenly colder, more menacing. "You think you can walk out of here after seeing what you've seen? No, you're already part of the story, just like the others. You will never leave. No one ever does." The drifter's legs felt like lead, but somehow he managed to stand tall. "He'll find a way out. I won't let you." The hotelier raised a hand, silencing him. "You'll see. All of you will see," he said cryptically. His eyes flicked to the door, and the drifter followed his gaze, his heart sinking. The walls of the room had shifted, subtly, but enough to trap him. The door was now sealed, and the room felt smaller, tighter, as if the hotel was closing in on him. "You've been marked," the hotelier said again, this time with finality, "and you'll never escape." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving the drifter standing there, his heart pounding in his chest. The truth had finally hit him. The hotel wasn't just a building, it was a force, a power that trapped its victims, feeding off them, keeping them alive in the most horrifying way possible. But there was still one thing the drifter didn't understand. Why had he been chosen? Why had the hotel marked him? As the drifter stood in the room trying to make sense of it all, he heard something, a faint whisper, like a voice calling to him from far away. It was a voice he couldn't quite place, but it sounded familiar. A memory, perhaps, or was it something more? He turned toward the sound, his heart racing. The walls seemed to be closing in, the air thick with dread. The hotel was alive, and it was hungry. What the drifter didn't know was that he was only beginning to understand the horror of the hotel. The worst part of his nightmare was still waiting just out of reach. The drifter couldn't stop shaking as he backed away from the room, The hotel's grip was tightening with every passing second, its presence like a living thing, wrapping around him, suffocating him. The hotelier's words echoed in his mind. "You've been marked." No matter where he went, no matter how hard he tried to fight it, the truth was inescapable. The hotel wasn't just a place. It was a parasite feeding on the living, and now he was a part of its dark cycle. He stumbled back down the hallway, desperate for something that could help him escape, but with each turn, the walls seemed to close in tighter. The silence was unbearable, like the building itself was watching him, waiting for him to break. The drifter's head swam, the weight of the hotel's dark history pressing on him. Every footstep echoed too loudly, like the hotel was drawing closer, its cold presence suffocating his every breath. But as he passed the door to the stairwell, something caught his attention, a faint sound. At first it was so soft, so subtle, that he thought he was imagining it. But then it came again, a low hum, a soft whispering, as if someone or something was trying to communicate with him. He turned toward the sound, his pulse quickening. It was coming from the stairs. Against every instinct telling him to turn away, the drifter moved toward it, drawn to the unknown, his curiosity burning brighter than his fear. He crept toward the stairwell door and, after a moment of hesitation, pushed it open. The door creaked loudly, its sound unnaturally sharp in the thick silence of the hotel. The air in the stairwell was thick, cool, and damp like it hadn't been opened in years. The stairs spiraled up in the gloom, shrouded in shadows. The whispering grew louder, but it was still impossible to make out the words. He couldn't tell where it was coming from, or if it was even real. It felt like the entire hotel was breathing in sync with Himiak's step he took made the building groan, like the walls themselves were shifting to accommodate his presence. He ascended the stairs slowly, his hand brushing against the cold stone railing. The whispering was growing louder still, frantic now, as if it were warning him. But warning him about what? He didn't know, but something told him he needed to know. He had to reach the top. The farther he went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air grew colder, heavier, and the whispering began to take on a rhythmic, almost hypnotic quality. It wasn't just words anymore, it felt like voices, many of them, speaking all at once, pleading, begging, calling to him from the shadows. The drifter's heart raced, his instincts screaming for him to stop, to turn around and run. But something kept pulling him forward. At the top of the stairs, the drifter found a door locked but old and worn. He could feel the pull, stronger than ever, as if the door itself was alive, pulling him in. He reached for the handle, and it turned easily in his hand. The door opened with a loud groan, revealing a long, dark hallway. The air felt even colder here, thick with dust and decay. The whispering was now deafening, a chorus of voices that seemed to scrape at his mind, urging him to come closer. He stepped into the hallway, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet beneath him. The walls were covered in old, peeling wallpaper, the once vibrant patterns faded and torn. The hallway stretched on endlessly, the dim light from the single bulb above him flickering and sputtering, casting unsettling shadows along the walls. As he walked deeper, he began to notice something strange. There were no doors, not a single one, only windows, but they were boarded up, their glass shattered or missing entirely. The windows seemed to watch him, like hollow eyes tracking his every movement. Then he saw it, at the far end of the hall, a door different from the others. It was solid, made of dark wood, its surface pristine, untouched by time. The whispering was louder here, urgent, pleading for him to go closer. He couldn't resist. His feet moved toward it without his consent, like he was being drawn by some invisible force. When he reached the door, he didn't hesitate. He pushed it open, and a rush of cold air hit him like a slap. Inside, the room was dark, almost suffocatingly so. There was a faint smell, something metallic and bitter lingering in the air. He stepped inside, the door creaking shut behind him. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw it. The walls were lined with mattress, hundreds of them, stacked in layers, each one covered in thick, dark stains. The drifter's stomach churned as he realized what he was looking at. Bodies. The mattresses were stuffed with the remains of those who had stayed. In the hotel before him, their life forces drained and their bodies preserved, like something out of a nightmare. His gaze swept across the room, taking in the horror. Some of the bodies were still twitching, barely alive, their eyes wide open and filled with terror, their mouths moving soundlessly. They were alive, but trapped in a state of living death, their energy siphoned away by the hotel, kept alive to fuel its insatiable hunger. The whispering grew louder, and the drifter suddenly realized the truth of voices weren't just coming from the walls. They were coming from the bodies in the mattresses, the people who had been consumed by the hotel's dark power, their souls trapped forever in a twisted, eternal limbo. A low, guttural laugh broke through the noise. The drifter spun around, his heart hammering in his chest. The hotelier stood in the doorway, his eyes glinting with malice. His smile was cruel, twisted, and his presence in the room felt suffocating, like the air itself was choking him. "You understand now," the hotelier said, his voice smooth and cold. "This is what the hotel does. It keeps you alive, keeps you here, forever. It takes what it needs and leaves you a husk." The drifter's mind reeled. No, this can't be happening." His voice was hoarse with disbelief. The hotelier stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with dark amusement. "But it is. You've already become part of the story. The hotel will never let you leave. You belong to it now." The drifter's legs felt weak, his body frozen in place. He had come too far to turn back, but he didn't know how to escape. The hotel was a trap, and he was its newest prisoner. There was no way out. The nightmare had just begun. But what the drifter didn't know was that the hotel's hunger wasn't finished with him yet. The true horror was still waiting to be unleashed. The air in the room was suffocating, thick with the stench of decay. The drifter stood frozen in front of the wall of mattresses, each one a grotesque shrine to the souls trapped inside. The bodies, once human, now lay in twisted states, preserved but barely alive, their faces contorted in expressions of eternal terror. Their eyes were wide open, locked in a gaze that pierced straight through him, their mouths moving soundlessly, begging for release. The hotelier's presence was overwhelming as he stood in the doorway, watching with a predatory smile that never seemed to fade. The drifter's pulse pounded in his ears as his mind struggled to process the horror around him. "You see, don't you?" the hotelier said, his voice low, almost soothing. "The hotel feeds. It always has, and it always will." The drifter felt his stomach twist violently. His eyes darted from one body to the next, as if they were all somehow watching him, waiting for him to do something. But there was nothing to do. The hotel had him now, body and soul. There was no escape, no way out. The walls of the room seemed to close in on him, as though the hotel itself was pressing against his chest, suffocating him. "How many more?" the drifter managed to whisper. "How many victims?" The hotelier chuckled softly, stepping into the room, his shoes making no sound on the carpet. "More than you can imagine," he said, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Each one of them is part of the hotel's power, part of its essence. They all feed it, they all keep it alive." The drifter's knees went weak, his breath caught in his throat, the weight of the horror around him too much to bear. The truth was so much worse than he could have imagined. This hotel wasn't just a prison for the living, it was an incubator for something far older, far darker. He turned away from the wall of bodies, desperate to escape the room, but the hotelier blocked his path, his eyes now dark and empty. "You think you can leave?" The hotelier's voice was suddenly sharp, his calm demeanor slipping for just a moment. "You're already part of the hotel. There's no running, no hiding. Once you've been marked, you're one of us. Forever." The drifter's mind was spinning. He felt as though he were drowning in the hotel's malevolent energy, trapped in a cycle he couldn't break. Every room, every hallway was a part of the nightmare that had become his reality. The hotel had taken him, consumed him, and now it was devouring his very soul. "Why?" the drifter whispered, his voice shaking. "Why do you do this? Why keep us alive like this?" The hotelier's smile returned, but it wasn't kind. It was twisted, almost amused. "Because we have to," he said, his tone patronizing, as though explaining a simple truth to a child. "The hotel requires it. It is an ancient force, something beyond human understanding. It feeds on the life force of those who check in, preserving them, using them to power its dark magic. Every soul it consumes adds to its power, and now you will be part of it." The drifter's heart pounded in his chest as the gravity of the situation crashed down on him. He was no longer a guest in the hotel. He was a vessel, a part of the hotel's insidious design. The horror of the reality settled over him like a blanket of ice. "You're a fool to think you can escape," the hotelier continued, stepping closer, his voice a low growl. "You're already marked. The only choice you have now is how you will serve the hotel willingly, or not." A surge of rage burned in the drifter's chest. His fists clenched, his mind racing for an answer, for something he could do. He couldn't let the hotel consume him, not like the others. He had to find a way out some way. "What happens to us?" he demanded. "When we're like them, when we're nothing but bodies in the mattresses?" The hotelier's eyes glinted with something darker pleasure, satisfaction. "Oh, it's not so bad, really. You won't feel anything. You won't think. Your body will be preserved. Your energy used to keep the hotel alive, to feed it. It's the perfect existence, eternal, without pain, without fear. You'll be a part of the hotel's story forever." The drifter's throat tightened. He could feel the walls of the hotel pressing in on him, the air thick with the stench of death. He wanted to run, to fight, but the hotel's power was too strong. The more he struggled, the more it gripped him, pulling him into its suffocating hold. "No," the drifter spat, his voice fierce with defiance. "I won't be part of this. I won't let you." Before he could finish, a sharp pain shot through his chest, and his breath caught in his throat. The hotelier's hand was raised, his fingers curled like claws. A cold, dark energy seemed to radiate from him, freezing the air around them. The drifter stumbled backward, his knees weak, his vision spinning. "You've already made your choice," the hotelier said, his voice a cold whisper. "You belong to the hotel now, there is no escape." The drifter's body trembled, his head dizzy with the pressure of the hotel's power, but he refused to give up. His eyes fell on the wall of mattresses once again, their lifeless bodies watching him with empty eyes. The hotel was hungry, it was always hungry, but he wouldn't let it consume him. He wouldn't let it take him like the others. With a desperate cry, the drifter surged forward, pushing the hotelier aside with all the strength he could muster. His body was weak, but his will was unbreakable. He stumbled toward the door, his heart pounding with fear and fury, but the door slammed shut before he could reach it. The room seemed to shift and warp, the walls closing in around him, the hotel's power locking him in place. He turned back to face the hotelier, who stood watching him with cold, amused eyes. "You can run," the hotelier said, his voice dripping with disdain, "but the hotel will always find you. You'll never escape." The drifter gasped for air, his body shaking. The hotel had won, it seemed. There was no running, no fighting. He had been marked. He had become part of the hotel's twisted, eternal hunger. But then, a flicker of something, a thought, a glimmer of hope pulsed in his mind. "The hotel can't keep me forever." With that single thought, a surge of energy flooded through him. His body screamed in protest, but he pushed through the pain, his hands gripping the walls as though they could offer him some strength. His eyes locked with the hotelier's, and for the first time, he saw fear in the other man's eyes. The drifter wasn't done yet. He would find a way to break free. The drifter's nightmare was far from over. The hotel's power may have claimed him, but something inside him refused to die. What would he risk to break free from the hotel's deadly grip? The drifter's heart raced as he pushed himself against the wall, struggling to stay upright. The coldness of the hotel seemed to seep deeper into his bones, draining his will to fight. The hotelier's words echoed in his mind, each one a dagger twisting deeper into his soul. "You belong to the hotel now." But something in the drifter snapped. He refused to let that be his fate. He wouldn't become just another corpse, another lost soul trapped in the hotel's dark, twisted history. He couldn't. The thought of becoming a lifeless body, preserved and forgotten in the hotel's labyrinth, was too much to bear. With a trembling hand, he reached for the nearest objected chair that had been left carelessly against the wall. He gripped it, his knuckles white with strain, and threw it at the hotelier. The chair crashed into the man's chest, but it didn't knock him back as the drifter had hoped. Instead, the hotelier stood unfazed, his cold eyes never leaving the drifter's face. "You're already part of the hotel," the hotelier said again, his voice almost mocking. "You can't undo what's been done." The drifter's pulse quickened, but his mind was clear now. The hotel wasn't just a building, it was a living, breathing entity, fueled by the souls it consumed. The guests, the bodies he had seen earlier, weren't just preserved, they were sustaining the hotel's insatiable hunger. Every life taken fed the hotel, powered it, kept it alive. And now, he understood what the hotelier meant. He was already marked part of the ritual. "No," the drifter breathed, his voice shaky but full of resolve. "I won't be another one of your victims. You can't have me." The hotelier stepped forward, his smile wide and cruel. "You've already agreed to the terms. This isn't something you can run from. You're part of the story now, whether you like it or not." The drifter felt the walls closing in again. The power of the hotel was palpable, its presence overwhelming. He could feel it in his chest, in the very air around him, the suffocating grip of something ancient and powerful. He was nothing but a pawn in its twisted game, a mere piece in a ritual that had been going on for generations. But something stirred inside him, a flicker of defiance. The drifter wasn't just going to roll over and become part of the hotel's insidious plot. He would fight, even if it meant losing everything. The hotelier's laugh broke through his thoughts. "You think you can stop it? You can't even leave the building. The hotel will always find you. It feeds on the living, on the fear of those trapped inside." The drifter's head spun. He had seen it, the bodies, the people, kept alive only to serve the hotel's hunger. But the drifter had a realization. The hotel wasn't just trapping people, it was feeding off them, using their energy, their very souls, to stay alive. The drifter's breath caught in his throat as he pieced it together. The pulsing mattresses, the warmth, the life inside them, it wasn't just to preserve them. It was to power the hotel, to feed the entity that lived within its walls. It wasn't a building. It was a creature, a force that had existed for centuries, devouring everything in its path, growing stronger with every soul it claimed. But what if he could turn the ritual against the hotel? His thoughts raced. The hotel's power came from the people it consumed their souls, their energy. But if he could stop the ritual, break the cycle, could he disrupt the hotel's feeding? Could he escape? "What if I stop you?" the drifter said, his voice low but filled with fury. "What if I destroy what's keeping you alive?" The hotelier's smile faltered for just a moment, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "You think you can destroy the hotel? You're nothing but a mortal, a mere human. You don't understand the power that lies within these walls." "I don't need to understand," the drifter retorted. "I just need to stop it." With a sudden wild motion, the drifter bolted toward the door. The hotelier lunged, but the drifter was faster. He burst into the hallway, not stopping to think, not slowing down. He had to act before the hotel's power consumed him completely. As he sprinted through the darkened halls, he could hear the hotel's eerie whispers again, louder, more frantic, as if the walls were coming alive, sensing his attempt to break free. But the drifter didn't care. He could feel the hotel's power chasing him, a cold, unseen force pressing against his back, urging him to stop, to give in. But he wouldn't. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the shadows closing in around him. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get to the heart of the hotel, to the place where the ritual had started. He had to find the source of the hotel's power, its dark, beating heart, and destroy it. At the end of the hall, he found another door, old and warped with age. He shoved it open, the wood splintering as it cracked under his force. Inside, he found what he had been searching for, a room filled with strange symbols and markings etched into the floor and walls, glowing faintly in the dim light. In the center of the room was a large stone altar, surrounded by candles that flickered with a cold, unnatural flame. On the altar lay a thick book, its pages yellowed with age, its spine cracked and worn. The ritual. The drifter's breath came in sharp gasps as he approached the altar. The symbols on the floor pulsed with a sickly light, and the air felt heavy, charged with energy. He could feel the hotel's power crackling around him, trying to keep him from what he had to do. But the drifter was done running. He reached for the book, his hands trembling, and opened it. The pages were filled with dark, ancient text, and as he skimmed the words, he realized that this was it, a heart of the hotel's power. If he could destroy this, break the ritual, he could stop the hotel from feeding, from claiming any more souls. With one final, desperate breath, the drifter reached down and tore the page from the book, crumpling it in his hands. The hotel shook violently as if in protest, but he didn't care. He had won. The ritual was broken. But the drifter didn't know that breaking the ritual might come at a much higher cost than he realized. The hotel wasn't just a place, it was a force, and it would never let go so easily. The drifter's hands shook as he looked down at the crumpled page from the ancient book. The ritual had been broken. He had torn out the heart of the hotel's power, its foundation of death and darkness. And for a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to believe that he had won. But the ground beneath his feet trembled. The air grew thick and heavy, the walls of the hotel groaning as though in agony. It wasn't over. No, it was far from over. The hotel wasn't done with him. It couldn't be. The whispers from the walls grew louder, more frantic, their voices overlapping in a maddening cacophony. The symbols on the floor, which had glowed so eerily before, now flickered and twisted, their shapes warping in a sickening spiral. The air smelled of burning ozone, and the cold in the room grew unbearable. The drifter backed away from the altar, his pulse pounding in his ears. He could feel the hotel's power swirling around him, its rage palpable, its hunger insatiable. He thought that tearing the page from the book had been enough, that he had stopped the ritual. But now, he realized the horrible truth. The hotel wasn't just an entity, it was a living, breathing thing, older than time itself, and breaking the ritual was only making it fight back. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" a voice said behind him. The drifter turned with a start, his breath catching in his throat. The hotelier stood in the doorway, his face twisted into a grotesque grin, his eyes glowing with dark satisfaction. He was no longer the calm, collected figure he had been. His form seemed to shimmer with a malevolent energy, and the air around him crackled like a storm ready to break. The drifter's heart sank. The hotelier wasn't just a man. He was part of the hotel's dark magic, an extension of its will, and now he was more powerful than ever. Do you really think you can destroy it? The hotelier continued, his voice thick with malice. You've broken a piece of the ritual, yes, but the hotel isn't something that can be destroyed so easily. It's too old, too powerful. It's part of the land, part of this world. And now, you're a part of it too. The drifter's breath came in ragged gasps. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The hotel wasn't just a place, it was a force, something that had existed long before humans had set foot in the Arizona territory. It had fed on souls for centuries, each victim adding to its strength, its insatiable hunger. And now, the drifter was trapped in its web. You can't stop it, the hotelier said, stepping closer, his form shimmering like smoke. You've been marked from the moment you set foot in this place, and you'll never escape. The drifter's mind raced. He couldn't let this be the end. He had come too far, fought too hard. He had to find a way to destroy the hotel, to stop it from claiming him. But how? Suddenly, a thought struck him, something that the hotelier had said earlier. You're part of the story now. The drifter had already become part of the hotel's twisted history. But maybe that was his way out. He wasn't just a victim, he was the key. With a defiant roar, the drifter lunged toward the altar. He grabbed the remaining pages of the book, which had fallen onto the floor when he tore out the first page. Without hesitation, he began ripping through the pages, one after another, destroying the hotel's foundation, its power, its very essence. The hotelier screamed, the sound echoing through the room like a jagged knife. The walls cracked, the floor splintered, and the very air seemed to scream with fury. The hotel's power was unraveling, and the drifter could feel Ith was breaking it apart. But the hotelier wasn't done. With a final, desperate cry, he reached out toward the drifter, his fingers elongating like tendrils of smoke. The drifter's heart raced, but he didn't stop. He tore through the last of the pages, and as the final page ripped, the hotel shook with an earth-shattering roar. No, the hotelier bellowed, his form twisting and contorting in a grotesque dance of rage. You can't end it like this. The drifter felt the temperature drop to a bone-chilling cold. The room was collapsing around him. The walls cracked, the ceiling buckled, and the floor gave way beneath his feet. The hotel was disintegrating, crumbling into nothingness, its power unraveling with each passing second. But the hotelier wasn't finished. With a final, desperate gesture, he reached toward the drifter, his fingers outstretched like claws, but the drifter stepped back. The hotelier's form flickered, his body warping in the chaos, as if he were being torn apart by the hotel's dying power. With one last cry, the hotelier collapsed into a swirling mass of shadows, his body consumed by the hotel's death throes. And then, with a final, deafening roar, the hotel collapsed, its walls crumbling into dust, its dark power fading into nothing. The drifter staggered backward, his body trembling with exhaustion. The room had completely collapsed, and the hotel's influence was fading. The air was still, quiet, empty. He had done it. The hotel was no more. But as he stood there, in the remains of what had once been the hotel, something in the back of his mind nagged at him. It felt wrong. The silence, the stillness, something was missing. The hotel was gone, yes, but the sense of unease lingered in the air, like a memory that wouldn't fade. The drifter turned to leave, his heart heavy with the weight of everything he had witnessed. But as he stepped into the ruins of the hotel's once immense structure, he couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel was still watching him. It was over. Or was it? The drifter thought he had destroyed the hotel, but the land still held its secrets. In the depths of the desert, something was waiting. The evil had been buried, but it was far from gone. The air in the desert was thick with heat as the drifter stumbled through the wreckage of the hotel. His body felt like it had been dragged through fire, exhaustion weighing him down with every step. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion, horror, and relief. The hotel was gone. The ancient evil that had consumed so many souls, twisted and preserved them, had been shattered. But something still gnawed at him, an unsettling feeling that wouldn't let go. The hotel's collapse had been too clean, too final, as if someone had allowed it to happen. The drifter couldn't shake the thought. The hotel was destroyed, yes, but why did it feel like it was only just the beginning? He pushed forward, his steps slow, his eyes scanning the debris of what had once been the sprawling structure. The ground was cracked, scorched, the earth beneath him burned with the remnants of the hotel's power. He thought of the faces, the bodies he had seen, preserved in their grotesque slumber, feeding the hotel's endless hunger. The horror was still fresh in his mind, the memories of those people begging for release, their eyes pleading for help. As he trudged on, the desert stretched out before him, barren and endless. The sun beat down on him with merciless intensity, but he didn't stop. He had to get away. He had to escape the nightmare that had followed him for so long. But no matter how far he walked, something felt wrong. The silence around him wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for him to make the wrong move. The drifter's heart pounded in his chest. His instincts screamed at him to turn around, but he kept moving forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. It was then that he heard a faint sound, barely audible over the wind. A whisper. His head snapped to the side, his breath catching in his throat. Was it his imagination, or was something still following him? The whisper came again, this time clearer, louder, a voice he knew too well. "You can't escape," the voice said, cold and smooth, as if it were coming from the depths of the earth itself. The drifter froze. His blood ran cold as the realization hit him. It wasn't over. The hotel had been destroyed, but the force that had fueled the evil that had once lived inside those walls was still there, buried deep beneath the surface. The drifter was no longer just running from the hotel. He was running from something far worse. He turned to face the voice, his heart racing, but there was nothing there. The desert was empty, the silence deafening. But it wasn't just the silence that bothered him, it was the ground beneath his feet. The earth was vibrating subtly at first, but then it grew stronger, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. The land was alive. The ground cracked open, and from the depths of the earth, something began to rise dark, shifting shapes, twisting and writhing like a living nightmare. The drifter's mind reeled. He had thought the hotel's evil was contained, destroyed. But this wasn't just about the hotel. It was about the land itself. The evil had seeped into the very soil, into the bones of the earth. The drifter staggered backward, his legs weak beneath him. His heart pounded, his breath coming in ragged gasps. It was all too much. The darkness that had haunted him, that had stalked him from the moment he had stepped into that cursed hotel, had followed him here. And now it was awake, free, and more powerful than ever. The shapes in the earth twisted, their forms taking shape human, but not. The bodies of those who had been trapped in the hotel, the souls that had been consumed, were now part of the land, part of the evil that lived beneath it. They reached for him with twisted skeletal hands, their mouths opening in silent screams. "You can't escape," the voice said again, louder this time, rising from the earth itself. The drifter's pulse quickened as he backed away from the rising nightmare. No, I won't let you," but the words died in his throat as the ground beneath him shifted again. The earth cracked open, and from the depths of the soil the hotelier's figure emerged shrouded in darkness, his form distorted and twisted, a shadow of the man he had once been. The drifter's breath caught in his throat. He had thought the hotelier was dead, consumed by the hotel's collapse. But this was something else. The hotelier was no longer just a man. He was part of the land now, part of the very evil that had been unleashed. "You think you've won?" The hotelier sneered, his voice echoing through the desert like a dark wind. "You've only made it worse. The hotel is dead, yes, but he smiled, his teeth sharp and elongated. "I am the hotel. I always have been." The drifter's legs shook as he tried to back away, but the ground seemed to pull him forward, dragging him toward the writhing mass of bodies rising from the earth. The hotelier stepped forward, his eyes glowing with dark power. "You can't destroy what was never meant to die." The drifter stumbled, panic clawing at his chest. There was nowhere left to run. The land had already claimed him. But then, something inside him snapped. He wasn't going to give up. Not now, not ever. With one final surge of strength, the drifter turned and bolted toward the horizon, running faster than he ever had in his life, desperate to escape the nightmare that had followed him for so long. But even as he ran, he could hear the hotelier's laughter echoing through the desert, growing louder and louder until it consumed everything. The drifter thought he had escaped, but the evil that haunted him wasn't just tied to the hotel, it was tied to the land. And now it was waiting for him to return, to finish what had been started. The drifter's legs burned as he ran, each step feeling like it might be his last. The desert stretched before him, endless and unforgiving. But there was no escape from what he had unleashed. He could hear the laughter cold, dark, all-consuming echoing in his ears, following him, growing louder with every breath he took. It wasn't just the hotel anymore. The land had become a part of it. The evil had seeped deep into the earth, and now it was hunting him. The wind howled through the desolate desert, carrying with it the haunting whispers of those trapped by the hotel's curse. The bodies, the souls, they were still there, part of the land, part of the nightmare that had followed him from the moment he had stepped into the hotel. He couldn't outrun it. The drifter had tried to escape, but he knew now that there was no place where the evil couldn't find him. It was tied to him, to the very earth beneath his feet, but he refused to give in. He wasn't going to be another corpse buried in the sands, another lost soul feeding the hotel's hunger. His body screamed for rest, his mind begged for relief, but his will was stronger. Ahead, he saw the remnants of the hotel, broken walls, crumbling stone, the twisted ruins of what had once been a place of terror. The hotel had collapsed, but its power had spread, like a dark stain across the land. The drifter knew that he couldn't just run. He had to end it. He had to destroy the source of the evil once and for all. His eyes scanned the ruins, searching for a sign of where the power still lingered, where the land itself was most tainted. The wind shifted, and with it, a coldness swept over him, like a hand brushing against his skin. The land was alive with malice. It wasn't just the Hotelier's power that had lingered. It was the very essence of the curse, pulsing in the earth, waiting for the drifter to fall, to give in. As he moved closer to the ruins, he felt the ground tremble beneath him. The earth cracked open, the desert shifting like the stomach of some great hungry beast. The drifter staggered, falling to his knees as the ground buckled beneath him from the chasm. That had opened up. A figure emerged shrouded in darkness, a silhouette twisted and grotesque. It was the Hotelier, but not as he had seen him before. The man was no longer human. His body was a mass of shadows and writhing forms, his eyes glowing like burning embers. He was a manifestation of the evil, of the curse that had been woven into the land itself. "You thought you had destroyed it," the Hotelier's voice echoed, filling the air with a deep guttural laugh. "But you were wrong. You were always part of it. You were always going to be mine." The drifter's heart pounded as the Hotelier's figure loomed over him. The man was no longer just a man. He was the land's corruption, its curse made flesh. And now, the drifter understood. The hotel had never been the true source of the evil. The land itself had been the catalyst. The place had simply fed off the darkness beneath it, kept alive by the souls it consumed. "You can't fight what is already inside you," the Hotelier taunted, his voice like poison in the air. "The hotel, the land, me were a part of you now." The drifter looked down at his hands, his fingers trembling. Was it true? Had he truly become part of this nightmare? Had he, in his desperation to survive, unknowingly become a vessel for the evil that had plagued the land for so long? But the drifter wasn't ready to give in. He hadn't fought this far to be consumed by the darkness. He wasn't going to let the hotel's hunger claim him out without a fight. With a roar, the drifter leaped to his feet, his body aching from the effort, but his mind focused on one thing: survival. He wasn't going to let this land swallow him whole. He had come too far. The Hotelier's twisted form lunged at him, his arms reaching out like tendrils of smoke, but the drifter dodged to the side, grabbing a shard of broken stone from the wreckage. He turned, his chest heaving with the effort, and with all his strength, he drove the shard deep into the ground. The earth shuddered. For a moment, everything went still. The Hotelier's figure faltered, his form flickering like a flame caught in a gust of wind. The ground trembled again, this time more violently, as cracks appeared beneath the Hotelier's feet. "No," the Hotelier hissed, his eyes burning with rage. "You can't do this. You'll never stop it." The drifter stood tall, his hand clenched around the stone. "I already have." With one final, desperate effort, he drove the shard deeper into the very heart of the land's corruption. The ground erupted with a deafening roar, the earth cracking wide open as a wave of energy shot out from the point where the shard had struck. The air was filled with the sound of grinding, of shaking, as the Hotelier's twisted form disintegrated into dust, the land's corruption unraveling with each passing second. The desert fell silent. The drifter stood alone in the ruins, his heart still pounding, but the air around him had changed. The darkness had lifted, the land had been freed from the evil that had held it captive for so long. But even as he took a breath, the drifter couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The desert was quiet now, but the echoes of the hotel's darkness still lingered, like a whisper on the wind. As the drifter turned to leave, he caught one last glimpse of the ruins in the distance, and for a moment he thought he saw a flicker of movement, something shifting in the shadows. He shook his head, the weight of the last few days pressing heavily on him. The battle was over, but he knew deep down that the land's curse had not been fully erased. The desert would always remember. Final payoff. The drifter thought he had destroyed the hotel, but the land would never be free. The curse that had fed the hotel's power was buried deep within the earth, part of it now. The desert, once a quiet grave, would forever echo with the remnants of the evil that had lived within the hotel's walls. He had fought, and for a moment, he believed he had won. But the land had been tainted long before he arrived. The hotel was only one part of a much older, deeper darkness. The drifter had broken the ritual, but he could feel the lingering presence of the hotel's hunger still waiting, still watching. There was no true escape. No one who stepped onto this cursed land ever truly left. The hotel might be gone, but the evil that once thrived there was part of the desert now forever, and it was always hungry for more.